And I think a lot of people have, including in the Bitcoin space, have become very obsessed with the number go up mentality and are not really interested in the ideology that helped popularize it among certain demographics. And personally, I think my interest in Bitcoin, it's the only cryptocurrency that I see as really having any value. I mean, don't mean to swear, but everything else to me is pretty much a shit coin. But I would say that it really depends on where things go from here and the extreme interest of, the traditional financial system and the US government, which the ideology of Bitcoin was opposed originally to working with those two entities.
Bitcoin was created as a decentralized force to challenge the traditional financial system and give power back to the people. But Whitney Webb, the fearless investigative journalist, just dropped a bombshell. The US government is now eyeing Bitcoin, and their intentions might just change everything. Appearing on Tom Bilyeu's podcast, Webb didn't mince words. She slammed the Bitcoin community for getting lost in the hype of quick profits and short-term gains, straying from the radical ideals that made Bitcoin a global game changer. She's not sold on most cryptocurrencies, calling them shitcoins, a distraction from what truly matters. Yet, despite her doubts about the crypto landscape, Webb isn't ready to abandon Bitcoin. She believes its roots, rooted in privacy and financial freedom, still have potential. But now, as traditional institutions and the US government move in, Bitcoin's original mission is at serious risk. Webb warns that the growing US interest in Bitcoin could completely co-opt its ideals, turning a financial revolution into another tool for centralized control. The very forces Bitcoin was meant to fight might be quietly taking over. Prepare for the shocking truth. Let's watch clips from Whitney Webb's interview to gain more insight. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for joining us again. Enjoy the video.
That one of the co-founders of Tether and some of the other people involved in early Tether appear to have significant intelligence ties. Some of them, like Brock Pierce, have ties to pedophilia scandals that happened in the early 2000s. Tether since then has come under fire for being not transparent about its reserves, among other things. And it has also been memory hold its role in the FTX scandal, where you had Alameda Research being very involved with, the Tether supply and helping it maintain its peg, among other things. And if we, of course, know now that FTX was involved in all sorts of financial misconduct, for lack of a better word.
To put it nicely. Yeah.
Yes. And, Solana, which has been responsible for these pump and dump meme coins, among other things, was also very closely tied to Sam Bankman-Fried. He's been called one of the main reasons behind its rise in popularity, for what it since has become. And there's no shortage of examples of sort of pump and dump meme coins that have sort of rugged people of a lot of money, and what has that money ultimately led to, and who was ultimately responsible for that pump and dump rug pull, wealth transfer, arguably, type of operation. It definitely would facilitate this type of bad behavior that we know intelligence agencies have engaged in with the past, like the BCCI example. It would definitely facilitate that. And the fact that you have these types of connections there, I think is certainly worthy of examination. And Tether notably has a lot of the same rhetoric that BCCI once used, the idea of, banking the unbanked, for example. But they're very willing to seize people's money on behalf of the U.S. Treasury. And Paolo Ardoino, who is the head of Tether now, has said that Tether is fully committed to expanding U.S. dollar hegemony globally, and has, onboarded the FBI and Secret Service on that platform, on their platform. And that essentially makes it a digital arm, you could argue, of the U.S. government. And when you also consider this military manual that was published by WikiLeaks, well over a decade ago, they referred to basically the dollar and some of these style of financial institutions that help propagate it globally, particularly in the global south, as sort of weapons, financial weapons of U.S. empire. And it's very possible, and I think, I think an argument can clearly be made that Tether is sort of facilitating that, specifically in economies that have become unstable or have very unstable currencies. And some of that is partly due to US sanctions. Some of it is due to these entities that have been called financial weapons of US empire, like the IMF and the World Bank. And then their currencies are unstable. They're covered in, they're trapped in this debt slavery model, which is a big reason for in many cases, for a lot of the economic instability, and people are being onboarded onto the digital dollar, onto Tether, as a way to be able to preserve their wealth. But ultimately, it's kind of a way to globalize the dollar and covertly dollarize a country without formally dollarizing it, in the way that places like Ecuador and El Salvador were formally dollarized. And if you consider the outsized role, including in the digital asset space, and sort of its formation and the infrastructure for it, of some of these currency speculators, and the role of currency speculators in the past, we can point to in the 90s, George Soros, or arguably people like, Jeffrey Epstein, if you're familiar with my work, having a role in, crushing local currencies. If that were to happen today, and there's no reason to think that type of currency speculation like Soros style in '92, for example, doesn't happen today. I'm sure it does. Then the end result could easily be people just sort of onboarding to the dollar, particularly a form of the dollar that is surveillable, seizable, and ultimately programmable. And those were the same concerns that a lot of Americans have had about central bank digital currencies. It's not necessarily that the money would be issued by the central bank, because money is issued by the central bank now. Right? It's about the concern that it presents to liberty, because it's surveillable, programmable, and seizable. And I think Tether checks all of those boxes ultimately. And really, any sort of digital dollar that the U.S. ultimately approves, which is very likely in the Trump administration, at his speech at the Bitcoin conference last year, said no CBDCs, but was very bullish on stablecoins, on dollar stablecoins, which are a major purchaser of U.S. treasuries, for example, and help service the U.S. debt. And if you combine that with a lot of his bullishness on Bitcoin, the talks of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, for example, I think it's very possible that we could see this type of digital dollar paradigm that Tether really helped start expand. And I don't think there's really a lot of discussions about whether this is good, or what the potential origins or intentions of it were or still are, because a lot of people that promote Tether have very rose-tinted glasses about it and parrot this idea of banking the unbanked, and sort of ignore the FBI Secret Service connection, the fact that they've seized people's money when the U.S. Treasury Department has asked them to do that, even if they're not U.S. citizens, and this type of stuff. What does this ultimately mean? And I think people that are particularly in the Bitcoin space, which has often been sort of flooded at times with the opinion that Tether is a Bitcoin company, should consider that, especially when a lot of the rhetoric and ideology around Bitcoin was about stopping the debt slavery system and the debt-based monetary system. Do people really want to perpetuate that? And is it really conducive to financial freedom and banking the unbanked?
Whitney Webb alleged that some of Tether's co-founders, notably Brock Pierce, had major intelligence connections and have been implicated in problems. Tether has been chastised for failing to disclose its reserves and for its involvement in the FTX controversy. Webb stated that Tether was willing to seize people's assets on behalf of the U.S. Treasury. She also identified similarities between Tether's operations and those of the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI. Tether's CEO, Paulo Arduino, has indicated that the company is devoted to increasing U.S. dollar hegemony abroad and has added the FBI and Secret Service to its platform. Webb argued that Tether's efforts aid in the globalization of the dollar and the covert dollarization of governments. She was concerned about Tether's possible use as a tool for financial monitoring and control. Let's watch more clips from the interview.
What do you think would happen if the U.S. did formalize a Bitcoin reserve and began purchasing that? Would that be good, bad, or indifferent for Bitcoin?
Well, I think it depends on your perspective. about Bitcoin. I think a lot of people have, including in the Bitcoin space, have become very obsessed with the number go up mentality and are not really interested in the ideology that helped popularize it among certain demographics. And personally, I think my interest in Bitcoin, it's the only cryptocurrency that I see as really having any value. I mean, don't mean to swear, but everything else to me is pretty much a shit coin. But I would say that it really depends on where things go from here and the extreme interest of, the traditional financial system and the U.S. government, which the ideology of Bitcoin was opposed originally to working with those two entities and sought to, supplant them because, they are bad. That kind of is the original part of the original Bitcoin ethos that has been sort of shed in favor of mass adoption and the idea that holders of Bitcoin will become extremely wealthy, and the concern and the idea about having freedom money or privacy money and all of that has sort of definitely taken a back burner and may disappear entirely from the discourse. And I personally don't see that as positive. I think if we're going to move into the digital money space and there's this push to eliminate cash, I think anonymity and privacy is important. The argument is that, well, bad people will use it to money launder and all of this stuff. And sure, that's true. But even if we go into a new digital system, I really doubt that the CIA and some of these other entities that engage in that same type of behavior will be forced to stop. I think it'll be money laundering for me and not for thee kind of thing. And also a lot of people that use those, privacy enhancing protocols and products aren't money launderers. They just don't like mass surveillance, which again was part of the, early ideology common among people in the Bitcoin space. And so, the idea that there was this, that it was going to challenge fiat and bring more financial fairness to the world and our debt-based monetary system and put us on a hard money standard, and all of this, a lot of that has sort of gone out of the window. And the idea of, Bitcoin, sort of use it as a new petrodollar analog. You want to play with Bitcoin, you need dollars to get access to it. Essentially, this is sort of the theory of my colleague, Mark Goodwin, who wrote The Bitcoin Dollar, that I would really recommend for anyone that wants to see what's happening now, having been written about like 3 years ago by somebody. This is something that I think is very likely to happen. And I think, people that hold Bitcoin, that care about that ethos still need to think about, if their bags get pumped, what will they do with that money to preserve financial freedom? Because I don't think the U.S. government or, BlackRock or some of these other entities that have become very bullish on Bitcoin are interested in protecting privacy or having Bitcoin be used for freedom money necessarily. And so I think that stuff personally to me matters, and is one of the reasons that I've tried to speak to people in the Bitcoin space for some time, because I think a lot of those people do care about the ethos, but I think there is sort of an effort to flood the zone, with you will, with this idea that it doesn't matter anymore, and that we should sort of surrender that ethos in favor of becoming extremely wealthy. And that is going to be persuasive for a lot of people, especially when we're potentially facing a debt crisis and an economic downturn. And historically, that type of drastic wealth increase for people can be very persuasive and getting them to change their ideology. But I would argue that, the direction the world is going, it's important to think about what we can do to preserve freedom. And if you're expecting to have a major increase in your ability to finance things, maybe consider financing things that help ensure privacy and help ensure financial freedom, and ensure that Bitcoin could become freedom money and not just a strategic asset for a few very powerful people. I personally am of the view that there are oligarchs that are interested in king-making markets. I think that's particularly true of someone like David Sachs, who's going to be the crypto AI czar and doesn't have to divest from any of his, investments or other, potential conflicts of interest with some of the firms that he'll be involved in overseeing or deciding regulation on. And when you have that type of power, you can easily king make and pick and choose companies that you want to see win, right? And so you kind of have to wonder if this is really going to be a free market type of situation, as a lot of people would like it to be, because when you have that type of centralized power sort of deciding who wins and who doesn't, and having only OpenAI and Oracle, for example, in this recent announcement, those are very big companies. They're likely to only get bigger should there be a more decentralized landscape in these industries that are so important to foster competition.
Whitney Webb noted that the potential of the United States formalizing a Bitcoin reserve and purchasing the cryptocurrency is a complicated issue that is dependent on one's stance on Bitcoin. She remarked that some people in the Bitcoin space have gotten preoccupied with the numbers go up attitude, putting earnings ahead of the idea that first popularized Bitcoin. Webb stressed her appreciation for Bitcoin's potential for privacy and financial freedom, which she says are important parts of the cryptocurrency's original concept. She voiced concern that these principles have weakened as Bitcoin gets public recognition and becomes more incorporated into the traditional financial system. According to Webb, the U.S. government's interest in Bitcoin appears to be motivated by a desire to maintain its influence over the global financial system. This, she claimed, is evidenced by the government's efforts to regulate and restrict the movement of cryptocurrencies. Webb emphasized the risks of concentrated power and conflict of interest in the cryptocurrency business. She also examined the potential effects of the U.S. government's actions on the world economy. She argued that the government's efforts to integrate Bitcoin into the existing financial system might have far-reaching effects, perhaps ushering in a new era of financial repression and control. She added that the growing trend toward digital currencies and the eradication of cash is likely to continue, with serious consequences for financial autonomy. Whitney Webb encouraged individuals to think critically about the consequences of the U.S. government's activities, including the potential consequences for their financial well-being. She also pointed out the need for individuals to be aware of potential threats and take precautions to defend their financial freedom and autonomy. As we wrap up, what implications do you think Tether's intelligence, ties, and role in expanding U.S. dollar influence could have on the future of Bitcoin and financial freedom? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, share this video, and hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.